Hello, everybody. Hope everyone can hear me. I think we can start. Everyone who wanted to join already joined, I believe. So thank you for joining today's webinar. My name is Alexander. I'm an attorney at corporate and M&A practice at GOLAW Law Firm. And also I would like to introduce my colleague Victoria, who is an associate at tax practice of our firm.
Hello to everyone.
We are very grateful to German Eastern Business Association for partnership and this opportunity to conduct this webinar. We are delighted to share our expertise and information about doing business in Ukraine during these tough days. So today, during this webinar, we want to provide you with a vision of how currently business works during martial law, what are the relevant prospects for investors, for foreign investors, and we'll discuss business environment and trends, opportunities for foreign investors, aid donors, current restriction and easements, everything the foreign investor need to know about doing business in Ukraine. Of course, the topic is very wide and we can speak a lot, but we will focus on major outcomes of martial law. I'm glad that we have such an active attendance of our webinar today. It shows that despite the situation, foreign business still considers Ukraine for investment, which is especially needed for our economy now. Moreover, following the extremely good news that Ukraine has become an official candidate for European Union membership, we believe that this webinar will be also practical because EU will interact more and more with Ukraine. So we will be happy to answer your questions. Please feel free to ask in chat, and if we will have time after the presentation, we will answer all your questions. I think we can move to another slide and wanted to conduct a short survey. So you will now see the survey on your screen. Please vote just to get more information about you. And while you are voting, you can enjoy this beautiful view. Hope the war will end soon and you will be able, who from another countries, come to Ukraine and see this offline. Okay, we'll give it time. For those who push into no button, I think that after this webinar, you will change your mind. Twenty attendants have already voted, so it's more. Okay, I think that we can stop the survey. So as we can see, most of attendants are planning or having business in Ukraine. So I think it will be useful for you to attend this webinar. Okay, so let's move on. Some may say and may think that in current situation, doing business in Ukraine as well as foreign investments into Ukraine are not possible. However, in fact, the practice shows that it's not true. First of all, it should be noted that from the very beginning of the military actions, of course, there was some shock during first weeks, but banking system and business in most did not stop. Business has relocated mostly to western and central parts of Ukraine and resumed its activity within 1 month after the start of the war. So what I wanted to stress on is that Ukraine is still open for foreign investments, and it is currently possible to start and run business and invest into Ukraine. We have prepared some interesting statistics for you. This chart shows number of new businesses registered in Ukraine during the first 3 months of war, and it shows which regions were chosen for this registration. Despite war, the top regions for new companies were similar, which were before the war. It's Kyiv, Lviv, and Dnipro regions. Also, a lot of new companies were registered in Odessa, Khmelnytsk, Ivano-Frankivsk, and Poltava regions. Let's move to another slide, please. So another interesting chart and statistics, which will show up shortly. Can you please switch to another slide? Thank you. Another interesting chart showed the comparison of the number of new businesses registration during 2002, 2021, and 2022. And as you can see, during April and May 2022, despite war, there were more new businesses registered in comparison to COVID times. So it showed that adapting to martial law is faster than the COVID-19 pandemics. And in the view of sector of economy of these new companies, we can see that most of the new businesses were registered in the field of agribusiness, trade, and informational technology. So basically, as mentioned, business works and comes to Ukraine. However, of course, there are some restrictions and implication of martial law. Let's go to another slide, please. As I said, martial law has an impact on business, and first, which was the most crucial, maybe one of the most crucial restrictions, it was restriction for registration actions. Since February 24, Ukraine's government has introduced a number of limitations for accessing the Ukraine's company register. It's still blocked, and only registrars and notaries can have access to the register. And at the beginning of the war, most of registration actions were prohibited. However, Ukraine constantly adopting various liberalization measures to assist businesses during wartime. So currently, as mentioned, all the forms of legal presence in Ukraine are available, and almost all the necessary registration actions with business can be done. So as you can see on this slide, we have listed all the allowed registration actions, which include setting up charitable funds. So you can set up limited liability company, farm enterprise, change the director of the company, change the address, types of activity, set up branches of legal entities, update information about branches, liquidate your legal entity, and even M&A is possible, although it was blocked, but now the limited list of notaries can perform also registration actions aimed to change of the content of shareholders. So sale and purchase of shares is available now too. Despite the limitations, the government also introduced some easements in this regard, and during martial law, it is not necessary to disclose information about ultimate beneficial owners, about the legal entity, which gives sort of relief, because before that, each registration action required the applicant to submit also the documents confirming ultimate beneficial owner. It was passport and ownership structure. Currently, you can submit document without this information, except for registration of financial institutions, or in case the registration action is performed in relation to the company controlled by Russian residents. In addition, registration actions can be conducted on the basis of ex-territorial principle, which means that you can submit documents to any state registrar, regardless the registered office of your company. Before the war, you could only apply to the registrar within the territory of region where your company is registered. And also, during martial law, it is possible to submit documents online with electronic signature, which is very convenient during these days. Let's move to another slide, please. Of course, it's not the only implication of the martial law, and in general, it has much more outcomes for business. What is martial law in itself? It is the special regime. It is imposition of direct military control over some civil activities. So certain categories of rights and freedoms may be restricted under martial law. It includes property rights, the freedom of speech, labor, social rights, freedom of movement, and so on. As a result, the state may be authorized to undertake various measures and limitations. For example, the state can use companies' assets and facilitate and engage companies' employees for defense purpose, enact labor duty for individuals for defense, force a company to dispose its property, restrict free movement and travel, conduct ID checks, and so on. However, it doesn't mean that these measures are already taken in respect to all business. Currently, most of business can operate in normal mode, but have to be ready to these restrictions, which can be applied in any moment. On the slide, you can see the most crucial, from our point of view, outcomes of martial law. So we mentioned the cross-border payments and temporary currency restrictions. This topic will be explained in more detail by Victoria a little bit later. Another outcome is restriction on sale of specific goods, prices regulation, and export licensing. So in order to protect Ukraine, our government has adopted special rules for export of certain agricultural goods and introduced licensing for exports, for example, for wheat and mixtures of wheat, meat of domestic chickens, eggs, cattle, beef, sugar, and etc. Also, the government has prohibited exports of certain goods such as oats, buckwheat, salt, and rye, and set the minimum zero quota for export of mineral fertilizers. In relation to other goods, there are no limitations and exports can be done freely. If we speak about mobilization and travel restrictions, of course, as you may know, men who are subject to mobilization cannot travel abroad. And we have now some complications with visas for foreigners. Even if a foreigner obtain a work permit here in Ukraine, currently none of embassies issue visas. It's because the system was blocked, and it can only be done in individual cases and in manual mode. So it's like a drawback during the current time. And few words about compulsory property alienation. It sounds very like frightening, but in practice, property alienation can take place in exceptional cases, and it always provides a compensation, and it shall be performed according to a law-established procedure. The government cannot just show up and say, please give me your property and go away. Along with these negative implications of martial law, we can see that there are some positive outcomes also. So, for example, martial law entailed moratorium for inspections and introduction of some tax easements. It will be also explained by Victoria a little bit later. And what's interesting, it's about simplified licensing permitting procedures. On March 2022, our government has introduced the resolution. For the duration of martial law, the resolution provides a temporary declarative procedure for obtaining rights to carry out businesses which in peaceful times required licensing or permission. The resolution also prescribed that effect of lapsed licenses will be prolonged. So this declarative procedure apply not to all types of activities, but for example, to import and wholesales and retail trade of medicines, as well as manufacturing, but only for current manufacturing license holders, appraisal services, security services, waste disposal services, placement of outdoor advertisement, high-risk works and use of machinery and equipment, dredging works, air emission, and etc. So these types of activities can be done by the companies by only submitting a declaration online, and a company that use this temporary release will be obliged to submit the full package of documents after abolition of martial law. Of course, this declarative procedure do not apply to all types of activities, and the regulation includes the list of most risky business activities which require licensing. For example, nuclear power, maintaining radioactive materials, production of explosions, construction activities, exploration of oil and gas subsoil, and so on. For these types of activities, obtaining of license are still in force. And another question we would like to stress on is easement for agri-sector. So on May this year, the law came into force, lifting number of restriction and simplified regulatory procedure in agricultural sector. The goal is to remove formalistic limitation and thus ease agricultural business. The law achieved this aim by simplifying phytosanitary and custom measures and widening access to pesticides and agrochemicals. The amendments include, for example, simplification of state registration of pesticides and agrochemicals, extending the list of pesticides and agrochemicals that are not subject to registration in order to be imported, equal recognition of electronic paper documents in this regard, and lifting certain animal transportation requirements. So, as you can see, although martial law introduces limitation, on the parallel, Ukraine does its best to keep business in operation. Can we move please to another slide? And in this regard, I would like to share with you the governmental support initiative that you can see on this slide. It's not all the initiatives we have. The government launched a wide list of business-oriented services, which the business can use during martial law. And for example, it all can be found on the website of our government. And for example, e-declaration is a service which allows any enterprise or company who start business in Ukraine by filling and submitting one online application, obtain all the necessary permits and approvals for their business. Export supports, it contains an e-catalog for exporters. So if your company is included to this catalog, it is more convenient for foreign clients to find you, and so on. DIIA Business Virtual Center provides constant assistance to business here and abroad, and provides consultancy services. Also, the government has introduced corporate lending, help with relocation of enterprises. You can also submit the application to Ministry of Economy about need to relocate. It will help you to maintain this relocation. Different introduction of different platforms such as Biz for Ukraine. It's a platform which helps to find projects for Ukrainian IT business, consulting business and engineering. Keep Going project, it's aid for small business owners and much, much more. Let's move to another slide, please. And one of the bright examples of how Ukraine striving for investment is a launch of DIIA.CITY. So this is a unique legal framework for IT business, which was launched in the beginning of February. And despite war, almost 300 companies have already joined it. For those who doesn't know what is this, it is a special framework for IT business, which was created by the government in order to involve foreign investment and provide transparent and clear framework for IT business. Ukraine used to be a hub for IT business, but it was used because of usage of private entrepreneurs here in Ukraine with the lowered taxes. And this model of cooperation wasn't completely transparent, but now with almost with the same tax burden, IT business can operate and use benefits such as lower tax rates, flexible employment model. The gig contractor model was implemented, which allows involvement of people for projects with flexible conditions in comparison to employment. Also, IT business joined the DIIA.CITY can use venture investment tools taken from English law system, is convertible loans, liquidated damages, preferences, options, and employee stock option plans, and so on. So basically, as you can see, our state do its best to involve investment and to expand business. Let's go further, please. Another slide. As never before, an acute need for different humanitarian aid occurred, which is essentially held, of course, by NGOs and charitable foundations. In total, almost 3,000 non-profit organizations were registered during first months of war. So it was the hottest topic. And a lot of foreign NGOs were seeking for opportunities to open branches and enter our market. And despite the war and certain restrictions, incorporation of charitable foundations, public organizations, and NGOs was available. But the most widespread question is what form to choose, what form of organization to choose in order to start charitable activities here in Ukraine, humanitarian activities, I mean. The law provides several options that you can see on the slide. You can establish a charitable organization, public organization, or establish a separate subdivision of a foreign NGO here in Ukraine. All these forms are non-profitable organizations. However, it has slight difference. So, for example, charitable organizations may be incorporated by one or more founders and can be managed by them. And these founders are not obliged to transfer any assets to the charitable foundation to achieve its goals. So mainly such organizations are incorporated to raise funds from local and international donors with subsequent transfer of these funds to those in need. Charitable foundations are most appropriate type of charity organization to apply for international technical assistance and grant programs, to receive free of charge donors resources, and so on. In comparison to charitable foundation, the public organization are focused on satisfaction of public interests in certain areas and not aimed for accumulation and distribution of material goods. For example, it can be created for different purposes, from cooperation with international technical assistance projects to involvement of consultants and advisors in the reform process, legal, social, psychological assistance, and so on. As to the separate subdivision of foreign NGOs, this option is appropriate for existing international NGOs with well-known names and resources. As a separate subdivision, it is not a separate legal entity. It's rather a representative office of foreign legal entity. So it operates on behalf of a foreign NGO. And it has a little bit more complicated procedure for registration. At the same time, it will be the most appropriate for those who already have funding from at the level of mother company. So basically, these are the differences. Okay, I think we can move to the next slide, and banking system and cross-border payments. I will pass the word to Victoria, who will tell us a little bit in detail about these issues.
Hello, everyone, once more. I'm happy to participate in this event today and provide you with some comments, clarifications about business in Ukraine under the martial law. Hope that our clarifications and comments will be useful for you. So, speaking about banking system and cross-border payments, I suppose that you may have the suggestion that banks do not work properly in conditions of martial law, but in fact, it's not so. The banking system of Ukraine functions, the payments are performed. The only exclusion here may be only in the context of the work of banks on the temporarily occupied territories. Of course, we cannot omit the fact that banks operate now with certain peculiarities and limitations. They were introduced by the special decree of the National Bank of Ukraine for the period of martial law. The requisites of this document you may see on our slide. And now I would like to comment on some of such restrictions and limitations. I think that these are the most important here to speak about. Firstly, the decree establishes that the payments in cashless forms shall be performed without limitations. This refers to payments within Ukraine. So the transfer and receipt of funds in Ukraine are normally performed usually. Secondly, as to the cross-border payments, there are some specificities. The decree defines the list of operations for the purposes of which the cross-border payments are allowed. This means that if the operation is not in such a list, the bank will not process the cross-border payment. For example, as of today, the cross-border payments can be made in case of import by the Ukrainian business entities of critical import goods. The list of such goods is defined by the government of Ukraine, and it's very, very extensive. In fact, it covers the major part of the goods and services from various fields of the economy: food industry, pharmaceutical industry, IT, textile, chemical industry, and many, many others. Of course, there are other operations within which the cross-border payments are allowed. Thirdly, there are some limitations referred to the cash withdrawal. The banks, as of today, can provide the client with the daily sum of cash in the amount which does not exceed 100,000 hryvnias. However, there are certain exclusions to this rule. For instance, if the company needs cash to pay salaries to its employees. There is also the limitation for withdrawal of cash in foreign currency, not only in hryvnia. The bank can provide the client with the daily sum of cash in foreign currency in the sum which doesn't exceed the equivalent of 100,000 hryvnias. Separately, I would like to mention that there are also limitations for transactions which are somehow related to the Russian Federation and Belarus. Of course, there are some other specific restrictions, but in general, summarizing all this said, the currently effective specificities in the work of banks, they are not so critical. They do not block the operation of banks, and they let them to keep functioning. Of course, one more important issue that in conditions of martial law, the legislation in Ukraine frequently changes. And as of all these restrictions in the work of banks, we suppose that in the future they may be lifted to a certain extent or even cancelled. And the National Bank of Ukraine makes certain reviews of these restrictions from time to time, and of course makes the respective changes which would be the best to do on this or in this or that moment of time. So now I would ask to switch the slide to the next one, and we will speak a little bit about taxation. From the very beginning of the war, the state is trying to support business and boost the economy. The sphere of taxation is not the exclusion and it's a mechanism for these aims. Ukraine adopted several tax laws aimed at relief of tax burden and tax control measures for business entities due to the martial law. I would like to highlight some changes in taxation adopted in this context to support business and economy in Ukraine. Here we have the first issue, management of tax revenues. We should start from the thing that as of today, the laws of Ukraine prohibited the major part of tax audits. No scheduled tax audits and almost no unscheduled tax audits can be carried out while the martial law lasts. This rule covers the tax audits launched and completed before the imposition of martial law, as well as new audits. So this is a very good bonus for business, as far as now there is a very limited list of tax audits which can be performed in conditions of martial law. Second issue is the possibility to be exempted from liability for delay in performance of certain taxpayers' obligations. In particular, a taxpayer which has no opportunity to meet deadlines for payment of taxes or filing a tax declaration while the martial law lasts will be released from liability for this delay, but he must perform the respective obligation within 6 months after the termination of martial law. This is an important condition to be released from liability. To be noted that there will be a special order on how to prove the possibility or impossibility to perform the tax obligation. It will be adopted in the future by the Ministry of Finance of Ukraine. So if all the requirements will be met for the application of such an exemption, the company will have no fines for delays in performance of certain taxpayers' obligations. One more thing is exemption from penalty for late payment of taxes. As of today, the tax code provides the rule that no penalty can be accrued, and accrued penalty shall be cancelled if the late payment is the consequence of martial law. So, as we see, there are essential limitations regarding the liability of taxpayer, and this may be quite beneficial for business in the conditions of martial law. Please switch to next slide. Second issue I would like to pay your attention to is a new tax regime. What does this mean? The tax legislation provided for the possibility to apply the simplified taxation system with taxation of revenue at the rate of 2%. The reporting period here will be 1 month. This option is quite beneficial and is available for almost all Ukrainian companies and sole proprietors. They may choose this regime by submitting their respective application to the tax authority. While applying this tax regime, the business entity is released from payment of VAT, what is very important, and the operations of such business entity, they are not the subject of VAT at all. Upon termination of martial law, the business entity will lose the right to use this regime. So it's a kind of short time, but quite beneficial regime for business from the standpoint of taxation. Please move to next slide. And of course, there are certain tax benefits related to the particular taxes. Here, I would like to clarify a few issues regarding the VAT and also the excise tax. Regarding the VAT, despite the martial law, Ukraine kept the possibility of VAT refund from state budget to business entities. I would like to clarify what does this mean. This is an opportunity for business to receive back funds paid as VAT from the budget if certain legal requirements are met by the taxpayer. Firstly, legislative changes as of March this year factually blocked all these procedures, but further, new tax laws as of May unlocked VAT refunds starting from 21st of July of this year. So the companies are really expecting the unblocking of VAT refunds, and they are expecting to get their money as it is established by the tax legislation. There are also some exemptions from VAT and the reduction of VAT tax rate. For example, as to the exemptions, as of today, no VAT for import of any goods by the major part of taxpayers who apply the simplified taxation system. Also, no accrual of VAT for the value of goods which are bought with VAT but further destroyed in the result of force majeure within the period of martial law. Also, no VAT for import and supplies in the territory of Ukraine of certain personal protective equipment, medicines, medical devices, and some other similar goods. Also, no VAT for import of certain types of goods by business entities for use in their own production activities. For example, this may refer to building materials, vehicles, equipment, and the like. As to the reduction of VAT rate, the VAT was reduced from 20% to 7% for import and supplies in Ukraine of certain kinds of fuel. And one more issue to note regarding the excise tax. Tax legislation introduced zero excise rate for transactions with certain kinds of fuel. This may be such fuel as motor spirits, gas oils, liquefied gas. All these tax reliefs are aimed at support of business and economy, and I suppose that some time will pass and we will see first results of all these exemptions and tax reliefs, how they really are beneficial for the business. These are all issues regarding taxation I would like to highlight now. Of course, there are others benefits in the sphere of taxation, and the legislative body of Ukraine constantly works on adoption of new improvements in tax laws for the period of martial law. Well, thank you for your attention. I will pass the word to Alexander, I suggest.
Okay, thank you, Victoria. Let's move to real estate overview, real estate issue. Of course, taxation is very interesting topic, and we can speak more and more, but our approach was to show you that the martial law introduces not only limitations, but also creates new possibilities for business. And real estate is also one of the major sectors in which some limitations were introduced, but currently I want to say that everything works, and the Ukrainian real estate waits for investments from foreign investors too. As you can see on this slide, we wanted to share one interesting statistic also. There was a widespread opinion that the prices will fall rapidly, but statistics shows the opposite. So, of course, as you can see, also the commercial and both commercial and housing residential real estate prices rised and didn't fall because, of course, one of the reasons is that the business has relocated to other regions, and also because a lot of cities were destroyed by the war, and people moved, so they seeking for new housing, and businesses seeking for new commercial real estate. And these statistics show how the prices changed during this time. Also about the prices of lease, I can say that during first months, the prices dropped, but not in all regions. The Western regions and central regions to which business relocated did not, the prices didn't fall at all and rised mostly. Let's go to another slide, please. And about the current real estate restrictions. So during first months, the registers were blocked, and any operations with real estate property was blocked too. However, in the end of April, Cabinet of Ministers has adopted resolution which restored the performance of notarial actions, in particular concerning actions and state registration of the rights to real property, to real estate. On this slide, we listed the most crucial limitations which are currently in force. So it should be noted that notarial and registration actions regarding real estate may be performed only by a limited number of notaries. The list of notaries who can perform these actions is established by Ministry of Justice, and it's constantly updating. It is prohibited to perform notarial and registration actions by the notaries in the regions which are occupied or the regions affected by the war. It's like Donetsk region, Zaporizhia, Luhansk, Crimea, Mariupol, Kharkiv, and so on. In other regions, the sale and purchase of real estate is possible. It is also prohibited to transfer real estate in and out of charter capital of legal entities. Notarization of agreements of sale of mortgage property, so foreclosure or more of mortgage property by banks, which belongs to individuals, is prohibited except mutual consent. The performance of notarial actions and registration actions shall be carried out by the notaries only within the respective region. So previously you could you could perform registration of real estate in other region, provided that some of the parties to the transaction are registered in a specific region, but now only by the location of real estate the respective transaction can take place. Also, it is prohibited to perform any registration actions initiated by Russian citizens or Russian companies. And it is prohibited to perform any notarial actions on the basis of the power of attorney. So the owner and the buyer of real estate shall show up to a notary in person. That's all I want to say about the restriction of real estate currently. As I mentioned, it is possible to purchase real estate and transactions are possible. So if you're interested in any kind of investment into it, please proceed. Let's go to another, yes, thank you. Another issue which was interesting and I think remains interesting for business, it's lease issues during real estate. So most of the questions, firstly, I would like to stress that there are no certain limitations on lease and everybody can lease property. However, the most common questions in this regard was whether the tenant can get a relief from rent during the war time. So there are three options, as you can see, in order to reduce or get relief from rent. First is, and the most common, and we always suggest to our clients, is negotiation, because even if you have statutory basis for exemption from rent, it's better to have agreement with your landlord. And during first months, we observed that due to martial law, landlords were willing to reduce the rent by 100% in some cases, but kept the operational expenses and payment of utilities. So the tenant could only conclude the supplementary agreement to the lease agreement and get the reduction of rent. However, in case the landlord refuses to provide this rent relief, there are certain basis for reduction under the law. It's a reduction in case the property cannot be used in full, and full exemption from rent in case the property cannot be used at all. So if the leased property is located in the area of active military conflict and you cannot, for example, use the leased property in full, you can claim the landlord to reduce the rent payments. In case the property cannot be used at all, for example, it's destroyed or active military actions take place, you can claim for the full exemption. However, in case the landlord refuses this, the landlord can go to court and you will have to prove your position in court. About full exemption, it should be noted that, for example, in case you are not using your leased property, but your employees are there or your property is located in this leased property, it may be considered as use. So you can lose this right to exemption. As I said, it will be subject to discussion and subject to proving in court. Basically, this is the all issues we wanted to highlight. We had one question from a participant who sent the question to our email before the webinar. It was devoted to, I will read the question. One point that would be much appreciated during tomorrow's webinar is a statement concerning the effect of the declared martial law on the limitation periods for claims. Thank you for this question. I wanted to state that during martial law on the legislative level, it was stated that all limitation periods are extended for the period of martial law. So you can be confident in this. And we have now one question from participants: how much amount to start the business? Of course, it depends on your business plan. However, in order to establish a company in Ukraine, it's not that expensive. So we have no limitation with regard to statutory charter capital of the company. So you can invest to company from 1 hryvnia to as much as you want. The registration can take place during 1 business days from the moment we submit documents. So it's very easy and it's very cheap. So please feel free to contact us if you want to establish a company here in Ukraine. Let's switch to another slide. So basically, if someone has questions, please feel free to reach out by these contacts to me or Victoria. We will be happy to provide you with a comprehensive answer, and we will be happy to provide with all the necessary legal assistance concerning all the matters of Ukrainian law. Be safe. Thank you.